My name is Nyeleti Magadze. I am a lawyer by profession, and I am here to tell you the story of women on the Hill. The women on Cornhill were obviously in prison, so the ability to protest freely and be able to voice what they are uncomfortable about was not always there. The opportunity wasn't there for them to protest. And remember, the definition of a prisoner, especially during apartheid times, was quite broad because most of the women who were there were just ordinary people who left home to go to work, and they happen not to have their dompas when they are stopped by the police in the streets of Joburg, and they would end up here. But they would be amongst prisoners who are also murderers. You know, there's the famous Daisy DeMalka, who was a murderer, who murdered her 3 husbands and her son, and she was sentenced to death, and she was kept here for 5 years. So they would have to also engage with hardcore prisoners who were real criminals, you know, which was also quite dehumanizing to an extent, and also part of trying to break them down and to make them feel like they don't really have control of what is going on or what is happening to them. One of the rules that were there in the women's section of the jail was that the women were not allowed to cross the atrium. And the atrium is the big center that connects all the sections of the prison. The only time that they were allowed to be in the atrium was when they were cleaning the floor. One of the prisoners, famous prisoners who was in this prison as well, was Winnie Mandela. And she decided, you know, this concept of not being allowed to walk across this atrium doesn't work. It feels unjust for her, and that she doesn't believe it's right, especially for Black women. And so she walked across the atrium, and that was breaking a rule, clearly, and she was confined into solitary confinement, kept in there. The rules were, in the beginning, solitary confinement was only 3 days, but those rules were never conformed to, and then the law became 30 days, and at some point it was even up to 180 days in solitary confinement. She stayed in solitary confinement, and when she came out, you know, she then spoke to the other women, recruited a few women who joined this march across the atrium, and they were all put into solitary confinement. But this happened a few more times, a lot more times, and as you can tell, at some point there wasn't enough space to put everyone in solitary confinement, and this rule had to be abandoned. I always believe, you know, if you feel something is unjust for you, until you do something about that injustice for yourself, you won't be able to do it for others. And Winnie Mandela did that by saying, I feel this is not fair for me, it doesn't work for me, it's unjust to me. And she did something about it herself. And therefore, she has the credibility to say, I can stand up for this thing, and therefore the other women could also join in that protest as well. I think it's quite important for South Africans to know the history of where we come from. And the reason for that is, you know, you tend to repeat history if you don't know that things happened. So you need to understand what happened before, why it happened, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes in the future. But also because a lot of the remnants of what happened back then during apartheid and colonialism, some of those things structurally still exist today. So as much as we have a very progressive constitution, we've got all the freedoms and all these rights, there are still the remnants of what structurally, the way things were constructed for South Africa to work, that still are true today. So visiting Cornhill gives people the opportunity to come and understand this history of going back to 1893, when the precinct was built back then, through colonialism, through apartheid, and to where we are today, where after 1994, and when we had our new constitution in 1996, the constitution court was eventually built in this precinct. So also understanding the contrast and the contradiction of the country that we are, you know, from this place of complete injustice with what the prison element of the Cornhill tells us, to the highest place of justice in the Constitution Court. I think that contrast is important because South Africa is a country of contrast. You know, we've got a first world South Africa and third world South Africa, and a lot of understanding why we have those two sits in this precinct in Constitution Hill. When I think about women in South Africa, I feel privileged to have been born in the time that I was, and that a lot of the rights that women fought for were in place by the time I was born, and definitely by the time I became an adult and I was working. My question for you, South Africans, is with what you know and understand today and what you see happening in this country, do you think we are done dealing with the remnants of our past and that we are ready to move forward?